According to the National Electrical Code, tanning beds are not specifically listed as requiring ground fault circuit interrupter protection. However, tanning beds may be considered fixed electrical equipment, which would require ground fault circuit interrupter protection under certain conditions. Specifically, Section 210.8. A1 of the National Electrical Code requires ground fault circuit interrupter protection for all 125 volts, single-phase, 15 and 20 amps receptacles installed in bathrooms, kitchens, garages, unfinished basements, crawl spaces, and outdoor locations. While tanning beds are not specifically listed in this section, they could potentially be installed in one of these locations, such as a bathroom or basement. If a tanning bed is installed in one of these locations, it would need to be ground fault circuit interrupter protected. Additionally, Section 410.42. B3 of the National Electrical Code requires ground fault circuit interrupter protection for spas and hot tubs. Tanning beds are not specifically mentioned in this section either, but they could potentially be considered similar to spas or hot tubs in that they involve both water and electricity. Ultimately, whether or not a tanning bed requires ground fault circuit interrupter protection will depend on its specific location and installation. If the tanning bed is installed in a location that requires ground fault circuit interrupter protection, such as a bathroom or outdoor location, then it would need to be ground fault circuit interrupter protected. It is important to note that local codes may have additional requirements for tanning beds, so it is always best to consult with your local building department to determine the specific requirements in your area. To further clarify the application of ground fault circuit interrupter protection to tanning beds under the National Electrical Code, let's delve deeper into the relevant sections and considerations. Firstly, it's crucial to understand the purpose of ground fault circuit interrupters. Ground fault circuit interrupters are designed to protect people from electrical shock by monitoring the current flowing through a circuit. If there is a difference of even a few milliamperes between the outgoing and returning current, it indicates a leakage of current, potentially through a person, and the ground fault circuit interrupter will trip the circuit, cutting off the power almost instantly. This is particularly important in locations where there is a higher risk of electrical shock, such as bathrooms, kitchens, and outdoor areas. Now let's revisit Section 210.8. A1 of the National Electrical Code. This section mandates ground fault circuit interrupter protection for 125 volts, single-phase, 15 and 20 amps receptacles in specific locations. The rationale behind this requirement is that these locations are often wet or damp, increasing the risk of electrical shock. While tanning beds are not explicitly mentioned, if a tanning bed is plugged into a 125 volts, single-phase, 15 or 20 amps receptacle in one of these locations, it falls under this requirement. For example, if a tanning bed is located in a bathroom or an unfinished basement and plugged into a standard 125 volts outlet, ground fault circuit interrupter protection is required. However, if the tanning bed is hardwired, meaning it is directly connected to the electrical system without a plug-in receptacle, the application of Section 210.8 A1 becomes less straightforward. In such cases, it's essential to consider the overall environment and the potential for electrical shock. Secondly, let's consider Section 410.42. B3 of the National Electrical Code, which pertains to spas and hot tubs. This section mandates ground fault circuit interrupter protection for these types of installations due to the inherent risk of electrical shock associated with water and electricity. While tanning beds are not spas or hot tubs, the argument could be made that they share some similarities. Tanning beds often involve moisture, either from the user's skin or from cleaning products, and they involve direct contact with the user's body. Therefore, some inspectors may interpret this section to apply to tanning beds, particularly if they are located in a damp or wet environment. However, this interpretation is not universally accepted, and it's important to consult with your local building department to determine their specific stance on this issue. Thirdly, it's crucial to consider the manufacturer's instructions for the tanning bed. The manufacturer may specify ground fault circuit interrupter protection as a requirement for safe operation. If the manufacturer does specify ground fault circuit interrupter protection, it is essential to follow the instructions to ensure compliance and safety. Fourthly, local codes and regulations may have additional requirements for tanning beds that go beyond the National Electrical Code. These local codes may specifically address ground fault circuit interrupter protection for tanning beds, regardless of their location. Therefore, it is imperative to consult with your local building department to determine the specific requirements in your area. In summary, while the National Electrical Code does not explicitly list tanning beds as requiring ground fault circuit interrupter protection in all cases, several factors can trigger the need for it. These factors include the location of the tanning bed, whether it is plugged into a receptacle in a location that requires ground fault circuit interrupter protection, the manufacturer's instructions, and local codes and regulations. To ensure compliance and safety, it is always best to err on the side of caution and install ground fault circuit interrupter protection for tanning beds, especially if there is any doubt about whether it is required. Furthermore, it is highly recommended to consult with a qualified electrician in your local building department to determine the specific requirements in your area. They can assess the specific installation and provide guidance on the appropriate ground fault circuit interrupter protection measures. Let's explore some practical scenarios to further illustrate the application of ground fault circuit interrupter protection to tanning beds. Scenario 1 involves a tanning bed installed in a commercial tanning salon. The tanning salon is located in a strip mall, and the tanning bed is placed in a small, dedicated room. The room has a standard 125 volts receptacle that the tanning bed is plugged into. In this scenario, the National Electrical Code may not explicitly require ground fault circuit interrupter protection, as the room is not a bathroom, kitchen, garage, unfinished basement, crawl space, or outdoor location. However, it is still advisable to consider ground fault circuit interrupter protection for added safety, especially if there is any moisture present in the room. Scenario 2 involves a tanning bed installed in a residential bathroom. The tanning bed is plugged into a 125 volts receptacle in the bathroom. In this scenario, Section 210.8(a)(1) of the National Electrical Code clearly requires ground fault circuit interrupter protection, as the receptacle is located in a bathroom. Therefore, the receptacle must be replaced with a ground fault circuit interrupter receptacle, or a ground fault circuit interrupter circuit breaker must be installed to protect the circuit. Scenario 3 involves a tanning bed installed outdoors on a patio. The tanning bed is plugged into a 125 volts receptacle on the patio. In this scenario, Section 210.8(a)(1) of the National Electrical Code also requires ground fault circuit interrupter protection, as the receptacle is located outdoors. Therefore, the receptacle must be replaced with a ground fault circuit interrupter receptacle, or a ground fault circuit interrupter circuit breaker must be installed to protect the circuit. Scenario 4 involves a hardwired tanning bed in a basement. The tanning bed is directly connected to the electrical system without a plug and receptacle. The basement is unfinished and prone to dampness. In this scenario, the application of ground fault circuit interrupter protection is less clear-cut. While Section 210.8(a)(1) may not directly apply, the dampness of the basement and the potential for electrical shock warrant careful consideration. It may be prudent to install a ground fault circuit interrupter circuit breaker to protect the circuit, even though it is not explicitly required by the National Electrical Code. In addition to these scenarios, it is also important to consider the age and condition of the tanning bed. Older tanning beds may have outdated wiring or insulation, which can increase the risk of electrical shock. In such cases, ground fault circuit interrupter protection is even more critical. Furthermore, it is essential to regularly inspect the tanning bed for any signs of damage or wear and tear. Any damaged wiring or components should be repaired or replaced immediately. To summarize the key points regarding ground fault circuit interrupter protection for tanning beds: firstly, the National Electrical Code does not explicitly list tanning beds as requiring ground fault circuit interrupter protection in all cases. Secondly, Section 210.8(a)(1) of the National Electrical Code requires ground fault circuit interrupter protection for 125 volts single-phase 15 and 20 amps receptacles in bathrooms, kitchens, garages, unfinished basements, crawl spaces, and outdoor locations. Thirdly, Section 410.42. B3 of the National Electrical Code requires ground fault circuit interrupter protection for spas in hot tubs, and some inspectors may interpret this section to apply to tanning beds. Fourthly, the manufacturer's instructions for the tanning bed may specify ground fault circuit interrupter protection as a requirement. Fifthly, local codes and regulations may have additional requirements for tanning beds that go beyond the National Electrical Code. Sixthly, it is always best to err on the side of caution and install ground fault circuit interrupter protection for tanning beds, especially if there is any doubt about whether it is required. Seventhly, it is highly recommended to consult with a qualified electrician in your local building department to determine the specific requirements in your area. Remember, ground fault circuit interrupter protection is a critical safety measure that can help prevent electrical shock. When in doubt, it is always best to consult with a qualified professional to ensure that your tanning bed is installed and operated safely. Let's further discuss the importance of consulting with a qualified electrician regarding the installation and ground fault circuit interrupter protection of tanning beds. A qualified electrician possesses the knowledge, skills, and experience necessary to assess the specific electrical system and environment where the tanning bed will be installed. They can identify potential hazards and recommend the appropriate safety measures, including ground fault circuit interrupter protection. An electrician can perform a thorough inspection of the existing electrical wiring to ensure that it is in good condition and capable of handling the electrical load of the tanning bed. They can also determine whether the existing receptacles are properly grounded and whether they meet the requirements of the National Electrical Code and local codes. If the existing wiring or receptacles are not adequate, the electrician can make the necessary repairs or upgrades to ensure a safe and compliant installation. Furthermore, an electrician can properly install ground fault circuit interrupter receptacles or circuit breakers to provide the required protection. They can also test the ground fault circuit interrupter devices to ensure that they are functioning correctly. In addition to installation and ground fault circuit interrupter protection, an electrician can also provide guidance on the proper operation and maintenance of the tanning bed. They can explain the importance of not overloading circuits, avoiding the use of extension cords, and regularly inspecting the tanning bed for any signs of damage or wear and tear. They can also provide tips on how to clean and maintain the tanning bed to ensure its safe and efficient operation. Consulting with a qualified electrician is not only important for safety but also for compliance with the National Electrical Code and local codes. Failure to comply with these codes can result in fines, penalties, and even the shutdown of your tanning bed. By working with a qualified electrician, you can ensure that your tanning bed is installed and operated in accordance with all applicable regulations. In conclusion, ground fault circuit interrupter protection for tanning beds is a complex issue that depends on several factors, including the location of the tanning bed, whether it is plugged into a receptacle in a location that requires ground fault circuit interrupter protection, the manufacturer's instructions, and local codes and regulations. While the National Electrical Code does not explicitly list tanning beds as requiring ground fault circuit interrupter protection in all cases, it is always best to err on the side of caution and install ground fault circuit interrupter protection, especially if there is any doubt about whether it is required. It is highly recommended to consult with a qualified electrician and your local building department to determine the specific requirements in your area. By taking these steps, you can ensure the safe and compliant operation of your tanning bed and protect yourself and others from electrical shock. Finally, consider the implications of not having ground fault circuit interrupter protection when it's needed. The absence of ground fault circuit interrupters in locations where they are required or recommended can lead to serious electrical shock hazards. Electrical shock can cause a range of injuries, from minor tingling sensations to severe burns, cardiac arrest, and even death. The severity of the shock depends on the amount of current flowing through the body, the path of the current, and the duration of the exposure. Ground fault circuit interrupters are designed to minimize the risk of electrical shock by quickly interrupting the circuit when a ground fault is detected. They can detect even small amounts of current leakage that could be lethal to humans. By installing and maintaining ground fault circuit interrupters in appropriate locations, you can significantly reduce the risk of electrical shock and protect yourself and others from serious injury or death. In addition to the physical hazards of electrical shock, there are also potential legal and financial consequences of not having ground fault circuit interrupter protection when it's required. If someone is injured due to an electrical shock caused by a tanning bed that does not have proper ground fault circuit interrupter protection, the owner or operator of the tanning bed could be held liable for damages. These damages could include medical expenses, lost wages, pain and suffering, and even punitive damages. Furthermore, insurance companies may deny coverage for claims arising from electrical shocks if the tanning bed does not have proper ground fault circuit interrupter protection. Therefore, it is essential to ensure that your tanning bed is properly installed and maintained with the appropriate ground fault circuit interrupter protection to avoid potential legal and financial liabilities. To reiterate, prioritizing safety is not just a matter of adhering to codes and regulations, it's about protecting lives and preventing potentially devastating injuries. Ground fault circuit interrupters represent a critical layer of defense against electrical hazards, particularly in environments where water and electricity are in close proximity. Ignoring or overlooking the need for ground fault circuit interrupter protection can have severe and far-reaching consequences. Therefore, it is crucial to take a proactive approach to electrical safety and ensure that all tanning beds are equipped with the appropriate ground fault circuit interrupter protection. This includes consulting with qualified electricians, staying up to date on the latest codes and regulations, and regularly inspecting and maintaining electrical equipment. By taking these steps, you can create a safer environment for yourself, your employees, and your customers. In conclusion, while the National Electrical Code may not always explicitly mandate ground fault circuit interrupter protection for tanning beds, the potential risks associated with electrical shock warrant careful consideration and a proactive approach to safety. By consulting with qualified professionals, following manufacturers' instructions, and adhering to local codes and regulations, you can ensure that your tanning bed is installed and operated safely and that you are protected from potential electrical hazards. Remember, when it comes to electrical safety, it is always best to err on the side of caution and prioritize the well-being of yourself and others. It's also prudent to maintain detailed records of all electrical work performed on the tanning bed, including inspections, repairs, and ground fault circuit interrupter testing. These records can serve as valuable documentation in the event of an incident or inspection. They can demonstrate that you have taken reasonable steps to ensure the safety of your tanning bed and that you have complied with all applicable codes and regulations. Furthermore, it is essential to educate users of the tanning bed about the potential electrical hazards and the importance of following safety precautions. This education should include information about the proper use of the tanning bed, the signs of electrical problems, and the steps to take in the event of an emergency. By empowering users with knowledge, you can help them to protect themselves from electrical shock and ensure the safe operation of the tanning bed. Also, keep in mind that the electrical codes and regulations are constantly evolving, so it's essential to stay informed about the latest changes and updates. This can be achieved by subscribing to industry publications, attending electrical safety seminars, and maintaining regular contact with qualified electricians and building inspectors. By staying up to date on the latest information, you can ensure that your tanning bed remains compliant with all applicable codes and regulations and that you are providing the safest possible environment for users. This commitment to continuous learning and improvement demonstrates a proactive approach to safety and a dedication to protecting the well-being of others.